All right, ladies and gentlemen, Actions class. Okay, so what is Actions class? So the reason we're going to talk about Actions class is because, first, let me explain. In the practice site, I actually wanted to discuss how to interact with frames. But as you saw something here, what I had to do, I had to scroll down. Okay, and here's the thing. With Selenium interacts best with elements that it can actually see on the web page. Okay, for example, right now I'm actually using a 32 to 34 inch monitor, but when I use my 13-inch Mac, a lot of websites display much smaller. Okay, so we need to consider these different type of scenarios when we are automating. So if I try to interact with an element that Selenium may not be able to see, the chances of my test case failing is pretty high, and I could encounter an element not interactable exception. Okay, so this provides the opportunity to introduce Actions class, but Actions class is a whole different topic of its own, which we will cover in this video. So Actions class is used for performing complex user interactions with web elements such as mouse actions, for example, moving the mouse, clicking, double clicking, right clicking, and keyboard actions. Okay, typing text, key combinations like Control C, Control V, like for example, copy and paste. You can do that as well. And so on. And these are actually scenarios that can be tested for certain applications. Okay, so in short, Actions class is used to perform mouse and keyboard operations. Okay, now in the example where you have to copy and paste, like for example, users know how to copy and paste using keyboard shortcuts, or they know they can right click and copy, right? So for example, there are some bank applications where when you are entering, for example, an account number and you need to confirm the account number, the websites do not allow you, or they've designed the website so that it doesn't allow you to paste a number, not to make your life harder, just so that you can enter the appropriate number without making any mistakes. Okay, and so you can automate a scenario where you can copy the account number from somewhere and paste it in a text box, and then see if that number displays in the text box or not. So you can actually automate such scenarios if you need to. Okay, you may have some scenarios where you need to press the enter key or the return key on your keyboard as well. Okay, now this class provides a way to chain multiple actions together to create sequences of interactions. The Actions class is typically used when you need to perform actions that cannot be accomplished using simple WebDriver methods. It allows you to simulate user interactions that require a series of steps. Okay, let's talk about some of the methods we can use with mouse actions. Okay, so we can click on the specified web element. This we've done already, but without using Actions class. So you wouldn't really use this so much. You can click and hold. So you may have a functionality for your application where you need to click and hold on an element. If you do that, then you may want to use the release method as well, which releases the left mouse button after clicking and holding it on the specified element. Okay, so are there applications where a user needs to click and hold on an element or a button or a link for a certain amount of time? Possibly, right? So in this scenario, you can use this method and then maybe pause your program for a certain amount of time and then use the release method to let go of the left mouse button. Okay, the next method here is move to element. This is possibly one of the most common methods you'll use. Okay, this moves the mouse cursor to the center of the specified element. This is how you can hover over an element, and we'll show that as well. Context click performs a right click on the specified element as well. Okay, so we can go ahead and show that as well. Additional mouse actions, you can double click Okay, you can use the double click method, performs a double click on the specified element. You can drag and drop as well, which drags an element from the source element to the target element. Okay, there's a drag and drop by method as well, where you can specify exactly using the X and Y offset axis to drag an element to the specified offset. Here's the thing though, these methods though are not so common, but could you encounter them? Yes. Are there applications where users need to drag and drop? Yes, and I'll go ahead and record these videos once we develop such functionalities, but a lot of companies decide not to implement these functionalities because, again, when you are developing an application as a company, one of your main goals is to make the application very user-friendly. And believe it or not, a lot of users don't really know how to drag and drop in most cases. So it's a complicated functionality, but it's a functionality that can be targeted to a specific group of folks, okay, or users in this case, okay? So keep that in mind. It could happen and you could use it, okay? Let's go over to keyboard actions, okay? For example, the send keys. Now, we've been using the send keys method from the without actions class to send text, but in this case, you may want to send keys and, for example, press the enter key or the return key on the keyboard. We can do that as well. And you can also use the key down and key up methods, which simulates pressing and releasing specific keyboard keys on your keyboard. So for example, if you want to press the up key or the down key, you can do that as well, okay, to make sure that the website is responsive in such cases, okay? Then there are other methods that we need. For example, the build and perform methods. The build we don't really need, the perform method we do, okay? The build method constructs a composite action that can be executed using the perform method, okay? This is used to chain multiple actions together in a sequence. However, you definitely do want to use the perform method, and we'll talk about that in this video. Okay, so let's go over to Visual Studio Code. Again, I'm here in the practice site, and what I want to do is I want to show you how to scroll down using actions class. Okay, so I've gone ahead and created a class called actions class. Now, I had to be very careful with this because there is a class from Selenium that I want to use that's called actions. So I did not call this Java class actions because I could make the mistake to refer to the wrong class when using actions class. So moving forward, it's good practice not to name a Java class the same name of a class that you may want to interact with. Okay, you could confuse the compiler, you could make a mistake yourself. Okay, so anyway, here in the main method, I have methods or code that we've used in the previous videos, which navigate to the website. But on line 23, this is the first step of using actions class. We need to create an object of actions class. And here within this constructor argument, we need to pass the driver, okay, as an argument. Okay, this is mandatory. We can't leave it. For example, if I delete it, we'll get an error. So you actually need to pass the handle of the driver, okay? Let me go ahead and bring this back. This is a must. This is kind of like if you remember when we covered select class, but instead of the driver, we actually had to parameterize or pass the argument of the web element, okay? So keep that in mind. So what I'm doing on line 27 is I inspected the hover button, this one here, the mouse hover button, okay? And assigned it to hover button of type web element, okay? And on line 28, what I'm doing is I'm using the actions reference variable and I'm using the method move to element and then doing dot perform. Okay, so what I'm expecting to happen here is for Selenium to scroll down to the bottom or scroll to this element here. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. The browser opens and there you go. So here you go. Very interesting things. Selenium was able to scroll down to this element, okay, and we see it here. There's a problem though. The problem here is that while it moved here, well, we did scroll, it didn't move down enough for us to see the options we see when we hover over this element, okay? It pretty much brought it around right here, okay? We couldn't see that option. So we have two options from this point. One, we can scroll down to an element that's lower here, which is code that I wrote that I'm going to show you in just a moment, or we can use another method that's called JavaScript Executor Interface, but we will discuss that in a later video. Okay, in this example, we're just going to focus with actions class. But one thing I want to show you here is how important the perform method is. So if I go ahead and delete the perform method here, let's see what happens. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and run this, and let's see if it scrolls. And it didn't scroll at all. Okay, so now we don't get an exception, right? We don't get an exception. Nothing failed, but it didn't work. So we need to use the .perform method as well. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and comment this out. Okay, and I'm going to comment line 29 out to show you another method we can use, which is called context click. So as we discussed, the context click method basically right clicks with your mouse. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and run this, and let's see what happens. So the browser opens, and let's see, there you go. That's the mouse right clicking on the web page. Okay, so that works. We use the perform method. Let me go ahead and comment this out, and let me move over to line 31 to show you how we can start chaining actions together. Okay, so on line 31, I'm going to go ahead and comment this out. I'm doing actions.move to element hover button. Same thing we had here. Okay, same thing we had here. Let me go ahead and delete this extra semicolon here so we don't get confused. But now I want to chain an action together. I want to context click. So I want to move to this element, and then I want to right click on that element once I'm there, or I just want to right click around that area. So what I'll do is after hover button here, after the move to element method, I'll do dot context click. Okay, and you see we have two options. I can just right click anywhere on the web page, or I can right click specifically on a web element. It's up to you on how you want to use this. Okay, I'm just going to call the context click method like this. So now what I'm doing is first I'm moving to that element, and then I'm right clicking and so on. Okay, and I'm doing .perform. Let's see if this works as expected. Okay, so there you go. The browser opens. Okay, the browser scrolls down, and there we see a right click. Very well, but it didn't really right click on mouse hover, the mouse hover button. It just right clicked somewhere down here. Okay, if we wanted to right click on a specific element, then you would have to use the other method, which expects that an argument of a web element. So what I can do is actually I can hover to this element, move to this element, and I can use the context click, but now I'm passing the hover button web element as an argument. So I want Selenium to right click on this hover button. Now we won't see much of a difference, okay? But if there's an area on your web page that may show something else, then you could right click on that, and you'll see different options and not these. These are the browser options here. Okay, so keep that in mind. I'm going to go ahead and close this. Okay, so there we saw how we can chain methods together. Okay, so here, what I'm doing in the example here below is I'm writing an example where I am hovering to an element that is lower somewhere down here. Okay, it's this link right here, REST API. So on line 34, I inspected the XPath for the REST API link, and I stored it in a variable called REST API link of type web element. And what I'm doing here is I'm basically hovering to that element. So I'm moving to that element, and then I am hovering over the hover button, and I'm doing .perform, all to see if I can actually see these options display here when I hover over. Okay, so before you saw Selenium brought us here. Now I'm going to move down to an element here, and then I'm going to use the same move to element to hover over this button right here. Let's see how that works. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. The browser opens, and Selenium will scroll, and there you saw. So you saw how it scrolled down to REST API, but then I called that method again to hover over this element, and we saw that here, and we saw these two options work. Okay, so this is how you can scroll down to an element, but keep something in mind. If you're going to use actions class to scroll down to an element, in some cases you may want to scroll lower, okay, to an element that is lower on the web page, so that you can actually interact with that element. Okay, these scenarios are very popular, okay, where you could log into a bank application where you need to hover over the menu, and then you see the options you can click on, and so on. Okay, so keep that in mind. So actions class is very big, and there's a lot you can do with it. Okay, let's go ahead and recap everything we just talked about with actions class here. Okay, so again, actions class is used to perform mouse and keyboard operations. You can click and hold, you can release, you can move to element, which is a popular method we can use. You can context click, you can right click. That's what it would do. It would right click, you can double click, you can drag and drop. Then you have the keyboard actions. For example, you can give it a shot using key down and key up, and so on. Okay, so go ahead and write this code out, and I'll see you guys in the next video.